You know what I'm doing right now? I'm editing. Editing sucks. It is the worst. It's humbling and it's difficult and it's a bunch of minutia. It can be really reductive. It's also necessary. It's a necessary part of any writing project. You have to edit. At some point or another, you're going to have to go through your work and take a look at it from a more objective standpoint and fix little things like errors. Because when I say little things like errors, because there are more things that go into editing than just making sure like the comma is in the right place and all that malarkey. Yeah, there's things like what word choice are you using? Are you using the correct tense? Or are you in a good place in terms of keeping a consistent storyline throughout? And there's a time and place for editing. Because again, it needs to be done. We talked about last time, your rough draft, even though your story is amazing, your rough draft isn't that good. It just isn't. It's okay. Everybody's rough draft is not that good. But that's why you then edit it, like I am right now. You know when you shouldn't be editing? When you're writing. So this is one of those things that I see a lot of new writers get hung up on, and why a lot of people have a difficult time with finding creative flow, and why they just kind of get stuck and think that they can't write. Now, we talked a little last time about how if you think you can't write, it's probably because you're trying to write like someone else. And if you think you're a very slow writer, maybe part of what the reason for that is that you're editing as you go along. And I'm not a big fan of this. I understand that, again, everybody wants to craft the perfect piece, but that is what post-editing is for. That's when you go back and you really hone everything down, you shape it and you make it right. When you're just writing, though, you should just let yourself write. Just write. That's the whole name of the game, just write. If you're constantly getting hung up on, is this the right word choice? Is this sentence structured correctly? Am I being redundant in the way that the story comes across? You are not allowing your ideas to just flow. Now, I'm going to say this. This concept, this idea, is more difficult to put into practice than it is to say. This comes from somebody who obsesses over word choice. I find myself getting caught up in this a lot, where I'll be working my way through a manuscript, I'll be in like a great creative state, and then I'll start asking myself weird questions like, have I used this word too many times already? Does this work with the rest of the story? Like, am I overstating something, or have I, doubled back in a way that doesn't really work for what I'm trying to do? When I have those moments, though, I try and recognize it. This is like a meditative thing, right? Like when you have mindfulness practice and you recognize that you have a negative thought and then you just let it pass on. I recognize that I am stuck for a moment. I let it pass, and then I just keep going. Because I know that I've already made mistakes in the manuscript. It's a rough draft. Of course I've made mistakes. I've made dozens. I've made hundreds of mistakes. Right now, the one that I'm looking at, this is 22 pages into manuscript, single-spaced. And I've got 385 suggestions from Grammarly on things to change and to edit. 22 pages in, and I've got almost 400 considered errors. That's a lot of shit that I'm going to have to go back and fix, and that's fine. I'm going to, but not while I'm writing it. This is a poor example. See, this is a good example. Actually, this is a good example of why you should edit in the background, because I'm already thinking, I started this video by saying I'm editing right now. That's just, that's all for show. It's to introduce the whole idea of this concept. But again, perfect example, because now I'm already letting the ideas flow, and I'm speaking to what I want to speak about. Same way with my writing. I just let the writing flow. Just let the ideas flow. Go back and fix the inconsistencies later. You see a lot of new writers who set daily word pars for themselves. And I'm not a big fan of this because I think that everybody writes at their own pace. And so I'm not suggesting that you use this as a way to like up your word writing par. I actually think a much more useful thing to do, this personally helped me out a lot when I got started, is set a time par. So when I first started writing, I would set 30 minutes aside every day and say, you must write for at least 30 minutes. If you're feeling the flow, great. If not, move on and do something else. And with practice, I started to find that creative flow more often, but finding that creative flow was all about allowing myself to just write, to stop obsessing over every single word and every single sentence and every single idea. Just let the idea happen. And I bet what you're going to find over time, as you start to put this into practice a little bit more, is that your writing as well begins to speed up a little bit. Not that speed is really necessarily the name of the game. There are some really crappy things that have come out because they were done too fast. But if you're finding that you're stuck or you're moving much slower than you're comfortable with, chances are you're doubting yourself. You're doubting your writer's voice, which we talked about last time. You're not writing authentically as yourself. And you're questioning every word that you put down on the page. Again, there is a time and a place to question every single word. And at some point, you should question every single word. But that's in the editing process, not in the writing process. Just write. I want to do an example, kind of like we did last time, a little thought experiment as far as this idea goes. Right, so jump on YouTube. You're already there. Great. And I want you to do find a time lapse of a comic book artist bringing an image to life. Not like, the step-by-step. I want you to find a time lapse of them going through their entire process beginning to end. And I want you to watch it, okay? Go do that now. I'm going to go back to editing. Magic. Okay, did you watch it? Great. What do you notice? It starts off with a bunch of abstract lines and circles, right? It's not especially clear what they're trying to do when they first get started. And then as they move along, the details start to fill in around the abstract lines and circles. And then those abstract lines and circles start to fade away for greater detail, and the image becomes sharper and cleaner, and it becomes clear what it is that they're putting together. And then suddenly by the end you have this gorgeous image that's actually unrecognizable from what it started as. But if you compare the two side by side, you're like, oh, I do see where this came from. I see what these lines and circles were all kind of aiming towards. That's sort of what you want to be thinking of in terms of your editing versus your rough draft. Your rough draft is just a bunch of lines, it's a bunch of circles, and it kind of resembles what the final product is going to look like. And then over time, you whittle that down, you add additional detail, you sharpen the image up, and suddenly you have a great manuscript on your hands. Now, you can't get to a great manuscript if you don't write the damn thing in the first place, so please just write. Because you notice these artists don't start by drawing an eyeball as absolutely perfectly as they possibly can. Because then how do you build the rest of the image around that one tiny detail? That's sort of what you're doing if you're obsessing over every single word choice. And again, I say this as somebody who struggles with this. I have to stop myself from drawing the perfect eyeball every time I get into my manuscript. And remember that when I am drafting, this is all lines and circles. We're going to cut this down to something much more readable and much more exciting and much more tightly wound at some point. We're going to add in all the little details that really make this a thrilling piece. But right now, I have to just write it. Again, this is badly exampled because I keep pretending to be editing, and what I have up right now, this is a rough draft. I'm working on a rough draft over here, guys. I'm not going to lie. But you don't actually want to watch me edit because it's a painful process. Everybody should edit when you edit a piece. If you're solo editing, you need to edit 3 times. The first time is for consistency. You want to read the whole thing all the way through and make sure that the story basically makes sense from beginning to end. Second time, you're going to go through and you're going to line edit. This is the part that really sucks because now you have to go word by word and sentence by sentence and agonize over your word choices and how you've put everything together. That's why you don't want to do this while you're writing it the first time. It sucks the enjoyment out of the writing process. That's my opinion, but I don't like editing. I have friends who do like to edit and they might argue otherwise. But I'm telling you, if you're stuck, it's probably because you are line editing as you're trying to write. And those two, to me, they're not conducive to one another. There's a lot of friction between those ideas. Writing creative flow should just be about letting an idea out. Editing should be about finding the brilliance in that idea because you have brilliant ideas. You have a brilliant story. But you can't pull that out unless you've put it down in the first place. So you've got to get these ideas down before you go in and line editing. Third edit, by the way, read it backwards. Oh yeah, I'm serious. All the books that I've self-published, I've read them backwards. Why? Because it takes the sentences out of context and you're more likely to see continuity errors that you would have missed because your brain fills in the gaps. Your brain works in weird ways and it will put things there that are not there when you're reading it. So you have to read it sentence by sentence backwards. And guess what? I've still missed shit. My first book that's in the marketplace right now, I don't want to say it's a train wreck because it's not. It's actually, it's pretty good, but it could be tighter. And even that one I read backwards. This is why you need other eyes on your work when you're doing editing. But when you are self-editing, those are the 3 edits that you must do. Once for continuity, a second time for line editing, and a third time read the damn thing backwards. I know it sounds like a lot, trust me, it is. I kind of believe that the editing process should take a lot longer than your rough draft. That's my opinion. Again, I'm not here to tell you how to become a successful commercial author. I'm here to tell you how to get a manuscript across the finish line. And if you are editing as you go, it's going to take a lot longer to get that manuscript done. So this is my word of encouragement. As always, just write. Stop trying to write perfectly and just allow yourself to write. This is the joy of writing, is when you just let the ideas flow and when the story starts to explode out of you and you can't contain it anymore because you're not thinking about every single word. All you're doing is thinking about the story. Don't lose the story for the words. And as always, stop trying to write, just write. Just write.